Hi.
Hi.
This is our fourth and last question for our exploration findings.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. 4, Abby. 4.
4. Okay, so what other attempts have been made to respond to our NPO? Basically, so we found a couple of articles. Well, yours is a book, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I found
It's also
an
an
article.
online article.
Okay.
It's also a book.
Articles/books, albeit what they are, about other attempts that have been made, projects similar, or I found one that was really similar, sort of. So the one that I looked at was the fear of Facebook. From fear to Facebook, I apologize. Which was basically some teens in Florida trying to teach the elderly how to use, they used Google Earth and email. And that was in 2010. So that's similar to our project. They're trying to learn about technology. But their project was more geared to an interaction between the teens teaching the elderly and the elderly learning from the teens. So instead of connecting with brain freeze. Instead of connecting with their families, they're connecting just with younger kids in the community in an effort to the same kind of connection. They're just trying to get connection, but ours is just a little different.
This is also what we talked about in the previous question about how within our own generation there's some difficulty with communication.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah. And I read up on, it's part of a book, but it's also an article I found online, and it's Designing Universal Access, which is web applications for like the elderly and the disabled. So these two guys, Robert Johnson and Simon Kent, they also did some of what we are trying to do, but instead they created they wanted to create web applications that were particularly better to use for the elderly, better for the elderly to use, like easier for them to use. And they wanted to try to see if that would hinder normal users or not, while benefiting the elderly. And they conducted the study. They wanted to, their main goal was to improve web browsing and other web communications for the elderly, but it turned out to be okay for the normal users to use too, so they converted most of their websites to that. But in our case, we're not creating web applications, we're just introducing the web applications that we already know to the elderly.
So the approaches and techniques that we used, that the other sources used, that we are looking at, are very, in the case of the one that I looked at, was very similar in the way that they had teens teaching the elderly in assisted living / community centers on the computer. But some of the challenges that they said they ran into were just like the time constraints, if I remember correctly, and some of the, I imagine, the financing for like either getting computers. They didn't really talk about where the computers came from, but if I were them, and we kind of are, I would imagine that there's the issue of either buying computers or finding computers that are usable and work well, and so those are some of the techniques, just like face one-on-one interaction.
I also looked at another article. It's by a group of Japanese people, but basically they're
how voice augmentation supports elderly web users.
Yes.
Gotta say the name.
Sorry, I was getting there.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Basically, this article talks about how elderly people are easier to learn through voice recognition, and so they encourage us to use more listening type exercises in our teaching to elderly people, as it's harder for them to read fast. Like, but if you're speaking to them, it's much better. So instead of like chatting, I guess, something like Skype that provides a video option is much easier web application to teach with.
Mm-hmm.
And also, instead of sending our curriculum like through like reading material for them to read up on and then do demonstration and like class curriculums are much more easy for elderly people to learn from. So that might be something we're taking into account when we
Definitely.
organize our curriculum.
Yeah, definitely. So, what obstacles were faced? Basically all the obstacles that we've talked about before.
Yeah, and all the ones that we're expecting too.
Which we've also talked about. But then some successful points of, like, the outcomes, the successes, and also the unsuccesses. The failures, I should say. I don't know why I chose that word. And just the article that I looked at, These Teens in Florida, were very successful at creating lasting connections with the elderly, but at the same time, and it was really hard. It was one of our weaker, we had many, but one of our weaker sources, because it didn't talk about the downfalls of their project, it more kind of was playing up the positive. But I think they had ideally wanted to do Skype, but then they didn't get to it in their class.
I think
so. So yeah, that's in our notes. So yeah, and then what about yours? Successes, unsuccesses, failures.
Well, the Japanese article was more of a study. It wasn't like they attempted it, but they tried they tried teaching it, and they proved that through a lot of testing they proved that auditory was the way to go for teaching the elderly. And then for the other one, where they were trying to teach the applications, trying to create applications for the disabled and the elderly, they're pretty successful making the applications easy for the disabled especially and the elderly to use. So it was fine with that. Most of the problems occurred when they weren't sure, because in our generation we have like sort of like an intuition or like innate ability to figure out technology, but so then we fail to recognize the problems that the elderly are facing, and that's sort of what they were going through. They didn't know why they couldn't understand what to use at like what button to click at a certain time, and I think we take for granted that we have all these options, and we sort of grew up with this technology, so we sort of figured it out by ourselves. So it's a different mindset for the elderly to go through, and it's something that we should watch out for when we're teaching them too.
Yeah.
Right, and that concludes our exploration findings.
Yay!
Until next time.